He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The president knows and has great sympathy for the women who have suffered these unspeakable harms. It's detestable to him. He and I have spoken about this as recently as 24 hours ago.
Los republicanos siguen montando un teatro político con los archivos de Jeffrey Epstein. Pero en esta ocasión, amigos, tienen un gran problema. Y ojo que no se trata de los demócratas, no se trata de la justicia, etc. El problema es que no saben ni su propio guión. Donald Trump inventa tantas mentiras a diario, nos cambia totalmente la historia tan seguido que sus aliados no logran ponerse de acuerdo ni repetir la misma versión. Y eso ha quedado totalmente en evidencia con la sorprendente admisión que Mike Johnson dejó escapar frente a cámaras. Un comentario que ha hecho explotar por completo este escándalo y que una vez más nos confirma lo que Trump más teme: su nombre en los archivos de Epstein. Antes de que lleguemos a ese clip de Johnson, que seguramente habrán visto un pedazo al inicio, quiero que empecemos con lo que dijo otro republicano, y ese es Thomas Massie, y él habló sobre la presión que está ejerciendo la Casa Blanca en este momento.
It's on the discharge petition. Do you think you'll get the number of signatures you need?
I think we'll eventually get there. What people are waking up and discovering right now is the folks who stayed up all night to go through the 34,000 individual pages have found that they're so redacted as to be useless, and that many of them were already available.
Do you think this oversight tactic is releasing these documents? I mean, how do you actually read it? Clearly they're pushing for more transparency, but it seems like it's not enough for you.
Well, I appreciate the effort that they've undertaken, but the scope of their investigation is to investigate the investigators. Like, they don't ever intend to have any criminal referrals. There may be some notations from the Oversight Committee when this is done that, oh, this FBI person didn't check this box, or this person acted unethically, or this person got too light of a sentence, but they're not going in and trying to identify who these perpetrators were of these heinous sexual abuse crimes.
I wanted to ask which Republicans you think will end up signing onto your discharge petition.
Well, I made the mistake of getting 12 co-sponsors, and so the White House knew who to target, so I'm not going to name anybody who's thinking about joining.
But you're confident you'll get the signatures?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's a strong effort from the White House. They're literally calling it a hostile act to sign this discharge petition now, and I don't know if that's precedented in this country to have a president call legislators to say that they're engaged in a hostile act.
Lo que explica Thomas Massie es clave. Lo que se publicó hasta ahora son solo documentos repetidos, son documentos que ya fueron filtrados, es más, posiblemente hasta editados por Pam Bondi, por Kash Patel, hasta por el propio Trump. Es lo que ellos quieren que veamos. Todo con nombres borrados, protegiendo a los republicanos. Incluso, un alto funcionario del Departamento de Justicia fue grabado admitiendo que los republicanos tendrán sus nombres tachados. Por eso mismo es que Thomas Massie, Ro Khanna y los demócratas, y ojo, no, Thomas Massie es republicano, están pidiendo que se liberen todos los archivos. Porque si Trump dice que ya los entregó, entonces, ¿por qué le teme tanto al Congreso para que los publique de nuevo? Porque sabemos que aún queda información. La misma que los sobrevivientes han estado contando con valentía en los últimos días. Y eso, señores, dejó clarísimo Ro Khanna en este momento.
The survivors actually, if you listen, as I know you did, but if others listen to their statements, they were basically pleading with Donald Trump. They were not saying, they were not attacking him. They were not criticizing him. So one person said, I'm a Republican. They said, Mr. President, previous presidents haven't released this. Will you please just find some humanity and release these? We're asking you as the president of the nation to do right. And for him to not even listen to them, for him to just say it's a hoax, it's a hoax, it's a hoax. I mean, it was so disrespectful that Thomas Massie called him out on it. So disrespectful that Marjorie Taylor Greene said to the president he should at least meet these survivors, because to call it a hoax is to to dehumanize.
Ahora bien, lo que yo quiero que ustedes entiendan es que esto ya no se trata de un tema partidista, porque las víctimas solo quieren transparencia, quieren justicia, quieren que los archivos se hagan públicos. Pero Trump sigue insistiendo en que todo esto es un engaño. ¿Cómo puede ser un engaño si Epstein fue un criminal real, fue condenado, y si miembros de la administración de Trump lo protegieron? Y aquí, señores, es donde entra la bomba que soltó Mike Johnson.
He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The president knows and has great sympathy for the women who have suffered these unspeakable harms. It's detestable to him. He and I have spoken about this as recently as 24 hours ago.
Johnson trató de encubrirlo, pero al hacerlo confirmó lo que todos sospechamos. Donald Trump aparece en los archivos de Epstein. Y ahora quieren inventarnos esta nueva narrativa absurda, que si su nombre está ahí es porque fue informante del FBI contra Epstein. Para empezar, eso ya contradice la versión de Trump de que todo era un engaño. Desde eso. Segundo, si realmente fuera un héroe que ayudó a la FBI, ¿por qué no quieren liberar los documentos? Porque la verdad es otra. Lo que hay en esos archivos no dejan a Trump en un buen lugar. Pam Bondi ya lo reconoció en privado. Trump está en los archivos. Pero Johnson intentó darle un giro absurdo. Como si al aparecer allí lo pintaran como un gran tipo, como el héroe. Nadie se va a creer eso, ni siquiera su propia base. Y mientras tanto, Trump sigue repitiendo lo mismo.
All run by Democrats, or for the most part run by Democrats. So what they're trying to do with the Epstein hoax is get people to talk about that instead of speaking about the tremendous success like ending 7 wars. I ended 7 wars. Nobody's going to talk about because they're going to talk about the Epstein whatever.
¿Cómo puede alguien decir al mismo tiempo que los archivos son un engaño y a la vez decir que fue el informante? Es ilógico. Y si de verdad lo fuera, ¿por qué no mostrarlo? Porque saben la realidad que es devastadora. Lo que Johnson terminó confirmando, aunque quiso intentar disfrazarlo, es que Trump está en los archivos, así de simple. Esa narrativa del informante del FBI salió de la nada, una mentira desesperada, y lo único que nos deja claro es que no quieren que esos documentos vean la luz. Bueno, señores, nosotros tenemos que decir la verdad, tal y como la congresista Jasmine Crockett nos dejó claro en este otro momento.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me just say that we are standing before you. We're having this conversation because of the oversight Democratic leadership. And so I want to reiterate that it's the Democratic leadership on oversight that has truly been able to move this forward. I'm sure many of you don't recall, but we were sent home early to try to avoid being able to take a vote on something like getting these files. We are about doing real transparency. We don't care who's in the files. We are going after you. So if I had to sum up what happened today, we heard the stories of victims, and honestly, we heard the story of at least one person that has never come forward before today. This was the very first time that she was telling anyone in a semi-public way her story. And if I had to summarize the theme, I would say that their theme was to do something. It is probably the theme of the American people in general right now when it comes to government, is that they want us to do something. So yes, we have the roundtable, but they actually want to see some action. The fact that this started off in the 90s, and we had someone who could talk about what happened to them in the 90s. But then you go down the line and you've got somebody that's telling us their story from 2008. These failures led to years and years of abuse that did not have to take place. And so the reality is this. Some think that this is all over and some think that nothing else is going on. But if there was ever a RICO case, it would have been the Epstein case. So how we went from something that should have been RICO because of how sophisticated of a system this was, and this wasn't just one little sick old man that was doing stuff, but there were so many layers, whether we're talking about the banks that were involved, whether we're talking about those that worked for him, that helped him, whether we're talking about the monster known as Maxwell, and that's exactly how y'all need to refer to her. She is a monster. She is not a victim. So let me tell you, I want some action items to come out of this, because for once we somewhat look like we're bipartisan in the Oversight Committee. Number one, we need answers. We need answers on why it is that Maxwell was transferred from her current station or her former station in Florida down to Texas. We need to have an understanding, because everything that I heard today leads me to know that for sure she was all up and in and through this entire process, not to mention that she was indicted by a jury of her peers, and then she was tried and convicted and given 20 years. So why is it that we had somebody, again, it almost seems like we are doomed to repeat our failures, because why is it we have high-level people that seemingly are running cover for a criminal? And that is what she is. She is a monster and she is a criminal. So number one, we need answers on what happened with that transfer, why it took place. And honestly, we all need to stand together and say that Maxwell needs to go back to where the monsters go, which is to a higher level of security. We also need to understand that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has legislation that she has been trying to push forward. And so in a bipartisan way, we all need to get behind Debbie, because we found, and what we learned is that there were loopholes as it relates to the Crime Victims Act. And so we've got to make sure that no other victims suffer in the way that they did when you have somebody like Alex Acosta that decides that he wants to play games and dismiss a case and never inform the victims of what's going on as is required by law. So we are going to have to fix those loopholes to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it took them 10 years of fighting this, and ultimately by the time they got to the end of it, well, it also was Jeffrey Epstein's end, and so there was not a resolution for that. And the final thing that I think that we need to do is, obviously, we need to continue to push forward and make sure that we get all the files, because we know that we have not received them all. Because I am standing in front of the press, I'm also going to make a plea. One of the things that I realized was that there's a lot of stuff that the DOJ may have, but honestly, if you don't have a thorough investigation, and I can't say if we had a thorough investigation or not, we have no idea. But the reality is that when you have investigators that go out and they collect information. I am not necessarily convinced that they even have gone out and done their due diligence to fully investigate this case in the first place. So if there's anyone in the public that believes that you have information that would be valuable, you've never been able to get through to federal agencies, or no one would listen to you when you try to go forward and bring information forward, I am asking that you trust Oversight DIMS and you bring that information to us. Or if you know where some information is contained, let us know so that we can then send subpoenas out that way. We want to do right not only by those that have already suffered under Epstein, but we want to prevent other trafficking rings that we know are out there. We want to make sure that we are doing right for future generations. So with that, I now have the honor of presenting to you the firecracker out of New Mexico.
Ahí lo tienen, señores. La propia tropa de Trump ya no puede ocultarlo. Mike Johnson lo deja escapar, Thomas Macy y Ro Khanna lo presionan y las víctimas siguen pidiendo justicia. Ahora bien, señores, los famosos aranceles de Trump, los que él vendió como la gran jugada maestra para defender a los trabajadores, está dejando en la ruina a los que menos culpa tienen. Los agricultores. Y ojo que no lo digo yo, lo dice alguien que sabe perfectamente lo que significa sudar la gota gorda en el campo. El ex senador y agricultor de toda la vida, Jon Tester. Donald Trump impuso estos aranceles descomunales con la idea pues de castigar a países como China. Obligarlos a lo que él dice jugar limpio. El problema es que esa estrategia tipo martillo gigante terminó rompiendo más cosas de las que supuestamente iba a arreglar. Aumentó el costo de los insumos agrícolas, disparó los precios de la maquinaria y al mismo tiempo terminó cerrando mercados internacionales para los productos de los granjeros estadounidenses. Una receta perfecta para el desastre.
John Deere is struggling under the weight of President Trump's economic policies. The American icon is down 29% from last year, and it's had to lay off more than 200 employees. As the manufacturer reports, tariffs have cost them $300 million, with $300 million more by the end of the year. Now, former Democratic Senator of Montana, Jon Tester, he is a third-generation farmer who's been running his own family farm full-time alongside his political career. He's now an MSNBC political analyst, and he is on a John Deere tractor for us today. It is a John Deere tractor, right?
No, it's not. But I do have a John Deere baler that the bearing went out of this year, and I will tell you, the bearing replacement had China on it.
Really?
Now I'm going to tell you, Katie, I would have loved to have a USA bearing, but the truth is, the most important thing was to get a bearing so I could get that baler running again. Because every minute it was down, I was losing money and I was losing hay. So the point is that with all these doggone tariffs that the president has put on, it's interrupted our supply chain on the input side, like parts for tractors and balers and combines. It's increased the cost of new equipment because those parts cost more. So when they build a tractor or a combine, it costs more for the farmer to buy. And then on the other side of the equation, because of the trade and the tariffs, a lot of our customers have said, the heck with the United States, we're not buying your commodities anymore. So things like hard red winter wheat are at an all-time low for the amount of price we get at the farm gate.
So talk to me about what it's like to run your farm. I mean, are you making as much money as you were before?
Well, the problem is that when you have prices down, which they are because of we need to be able to sell to foreign nations, particularly the Pacific Rim, and you have input costs that are up, it doesn't leave a lot of margin for error. And quite frankly, Charlotte and I are fine because we've been farming for nearly 50 years. But the people who are new to agriculture, those young farmers who don't have the cushion, they haven't saved money for times like this, they're going to be in trouble. And a lot of those folks are going to go broke. And I would also say this, if this continues, a lot of folks like me are going to go broke too.
When you say if this continues, what do you mean by this?
This means higher input costs, and by the way, not just farm parts, but inputs for fertilizers and chemicals. And then low prices at the farm gate for what we get when we haul our grain to the elevator is very low because we need those foreign markets to help drive up our prices to be able to pay for things like new combines and parts for those new combines when they break down.
So would there have been a way for Donald Trump to rehome manufacturing, to say, hey, listen, we don't think that you should be getting all your parts from China. We don't think that we should be getting steel from overseas. We want to be able to have John Deere not lay off people, like 230 that they've laid off, but hire 230 more people, maybe even more, in order to have a flourishing business in the United States. Would there be a way to do that in the world as complicated as it currently is?
Yeah, and I would just say, as with many things, don't use a sledgehammer, use a pair of pliers, and tweak the system to encourage folks to bring their businesses over here. But it can't be done overnight. It's going to take time, and try to minimize the increased costs along the way by encouraging those folks to continue to supply materials to the United States manufacturers. And I think that's how you do it. When you walk in and say, look, we're going to put 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50% tariffs on folks, it kind of turns them off when you say, well, we'd like to sell you some grain or we'd like to sell you some lentils or soybeans. They're going to say, what the heck, man? You're torching us on one side. We're not buying your product on the other. And farmers get caught in the middle, and then we end up in a tough shape. But no, they should have done it slowly, not overnight, and then it wouldn't have caused the disruption it's caused.
I wasn't quite sure what this shot would be like of you working out in the field today. I thought maybe you were just going to be, sitting next to a tractor, showing it as here's what a tractor looks like, Katie, you New York City gal. But no, you're actually sitting on one and working. Thank you so much for being with us and taking the time out of what looks like a busy day for you, Senator.
Katie, it's always a pleasure to talk agriculture. Thank you.
Señores, Jon Tester. Él es el ejemplo de muchos otros agricultores. Él lo está viviendo en carne propia. Piezas de maquinaria mucho más caras, porque lógico, vienen de China. Fertilizantes, químicos, que cuestan el doble. Y al mismo tiempo los compradores extranjeros van y te dicen, ¿sabes qué? Estados Unidos, no queremos tus granos. Esto es lo irónico, ¿no? Porque Trump prometió que con sus tarifas más bien iba a fortalecer las empresas estadounidenses. Que por ejemplo John Deere iba a contratar más gente, que la economía rural iba a florecer. ¿Cuál fue la realidad? John Deere despidió a cientos de empleados y reportó pérdidas millonarias. Los granjeros nuevos, los que recién empiezan, no tienen colchón financiero. Se están yendo directamente a la quiebra. Y hasta, me animo a decir, los que llevan décadas, como el propio Jon Tester, reconocen que si esto sigue así, ni ellos van a poder aguantar. Trump siempre nos ha dicho que él es el gran negociador. Pero lo que estamos viendo aquí, señores, es todo lo contrario. En vez de un gran negociador estratégico, podemos decir, es un golpeador de improvisión. Lo que dice Tester es clave, ¿no? Porque en lugar de usar un mazo, se pudo haber usado tal vez un par de pinzas. Es decir, cambios graduales, incentivos reales para poder reubicar la manufactura. No un castigo inmediato que lo único que hizo fue ahuyentar clientes y encarecerlo todo. He visto muchos defensores de Trump que dicen, pero al menos intentó traer los empleos manufactureros de vuelta a Estados Unidos. Aquí tenemos que ser claros. La intención puede sonar patriótica. Me atrevo a decir populista. La ejecución, un desastre total. ¿Por qué? Amigos, no se puede reconstruir un sistema industrial en meses luego de décadas de globalización. Mucho menos hacerlo con medidas que sabotean a tu propio pueblo en el camino. O sea, si tu plan económico significa que los agricultores pagan más, venden menos y se arruinan, entonces, amigos, eso es un sabotaje. Los aranceles descomunales del trumpismo no fueron una estrategia de protección. Terminó siendo un golpe mortal para los agricultores. Prometió prosperidad, entregó bancarrota. El campo estadounidense, que en teoría, ¿no? Creo yo que debería ser su mayor aliado. Terminó convertido en la primera víctima de su guerra comercial improvisada. Pero bueno, señores, ¿qué opinan ustedes? Quiero saber qué es lo que creen. ¿Creen que estos aranceles fueron un error garrafal? ¿O todavía hay quienes piensan que Trump tenía o tiene razón en aplicar esta política? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, darle like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete a nuestro canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.